Welcome to the Magical Salon, where two regular people, Amanda and James, explore mystical ideas and big questions. From books to pop culture, if it's a doorway to something deeper, we're probably into it. We're not experts, and maybe you aren't either, but that's kind of the point. Welcome back to the Magical Salon. I'm Amanda, your spiritual aspirant.
And I'm James, your resident alchemist, still here.
You're always going to be the resident alchemist, aren't you?
Maybe. It's a work in progress.
For this episode, we're going to focus on Dr. David Hawkins' book on the map of consciousness, which you read last year and really enjoyed. So today we're going to talk about what the map is and how we see some of those concepts lining up with other things we know and have read about and talked about. But instead of just jumping into it, I thought we could dip a toe in first. So what is the map of consciousness in a nutshell?
At a high level, this guy, and I mean, I don't know, he's a doctor of some sort, I guess. It's really just, I think, a framework, the way we use it in our lives to kind of assess kind of where people are operating, for lack of a better word. So if you're at a higher frequency, according to him, he quantified consciousness and is able to say things are at a higher or lower level of consciousness. So 0, I guess, is dead on his map, maybe. Like, you're not alive, you're not conscious. And then it goes from low levels up. So you go 0 is dead, 20 is shame on his list, which is like, you know, you're embarrassed of everything, whatever, woe is me kind of a person on the low level. And then as you slowly go up, you get to grief. Fear he has as 100. Anger is at 150. So he's just kind of like rating emotions, really, kind of.
But that's each emotion that you listed is where, if you were to fall on that map, like if your position was shame, you see everything from a shame perspective, right?
Right.
Like that's your dominating way of perceiving the world, right?
So if your name is Bob and you're a 20, he's basically saying Bob is looking at the world more often than not with shame. That's probably a bad example because it's kind of hard to come up with. But like, let's say fear, and you and I have talked about this. He says that there's a big difference on the map. So it goes from 0, let's say 20, to 1,000. And he has 1,000 as the all, God, Buddha mind, whatever, everything is contained there, right? And I think kind of impossible for a human to actually attain or maintain, which that's not the point. It's more just that there are these different levels. And so he talks about going from 200 on his map, which is all made up.
It's not made up. It's extremely scientific. He used like muscle memory coding or some shit, and he tries to explain like the mechanics of it, but honestly, I just kind of, that doesn't resonate with me, so I've swept past it.
Yeah, I kind of just threw that away too, because I was like, you know, I mean, I think what he's really trying to do, which I kind of agree with, he kind of tries to explain the emotions. So hearing it on its face, it's kind of absurd. Like fear is, you're ranking that somehow. But when it's a mind frame, a point of view. So if you were in a fear-based mindset, you're not going to go on a walk at night because you're afraid you're going to get mugged, or you don't know the area, or what if you're harassed or somebody catcalls or whatever. That's more, he would say, fear-based, right? You are creating that, and therefore that's the world you will kind of see, right? If you're skittish and afraid, you're going to be walking with your shoulders hunched, head swiveling, everybody's a potential enemy or ne'er-do-well, right? Then if you fast forward, once you go above 200, which he says is courage, and this is how we refer to it, 200 and below, fear-based reality. This is the way we speak to it. And then anything above that is more love, I guess. But just, you know, are you half empty, half full? I think is kind of where 200. So your outlook on life and just the general world starts to kind of change from there.
Yeah, okay, so that's a good place to start. So then in regard to like the guy, the David Hawkins guy, so it says in the books, I guess either in the beginning or at the end, that he's like some director. Well, I think he's dead now, but
He is dead.
Director of the Institute for Spiritual Research, which I'm not sure what that is, but he's a doctor because he was a psychiatrist, and he abandoned his practice upon enlightenment at the age of 38, which also when he was 38, he claims to have healed himself because when he became enlightened, he was capable of that. So his main thing is like devotional non-duality, which is basically like once you get to the higher levels of the map of consciousness, you get into love, which is kind of like tapping into the all, because at the lower levels, like everything's very dualistic. It's either or. But then once you get past that, then it's both, right? It's both and. Instead of being a duality, it's a one.
Which I think that's a very interesting point because so think of what you just said, the either or is very black and white, right? Binary, 1 and 0, good or bad. And that's how most people on a lower, and he says most of the world is below 200, right? In terms of consciousness, he says we are living in a fear-based reality, basically, by and large. And because of that, it shapes your outlook on everything. But even politics, it's left or right, blue or red. It's all very binary, but to your point, to be above that, you start, instead of looking at either or, it's how can we both benefit? Like love doesn't hurt anyone, it's only good for everybody. And it's kind of like building everything up through love when you act through love.
But I also feel like for me, it's helpful. Part of the framework that he provides in that book that's most helpful to me is you literally see the world in a different way depending on where you are within the map of consciousness. Like to your point with the fear-based reality thing, it's not like, oh, I'm just pretending to have all these fears. It's like I legitimately, when I go out of the house, anything is a potential threat compared to someone who just like lives more freely than that.
Think about the modern world. The news is fear-based, and most people live through the news. You get notifications constantly. Murder does this, fires do that, global warming, we're all gonna die, the world is ending, apocalypse imminent. So the modern world, everything that's being thrown at you kind of is a fear-based reality. But you can kind of opt in to that as well, which he kind of talks about is it's a choice, right? And I think he uses at some point the idea of a spiritual will being you can, and I think we'll get into this, but you can raise yourself on the map through your spiritual will. And he says specifically, information is nothing if you don't kind of practice or live what you are preaching. You can read any book about enlightenment or loving kindness or awareness, but if you're still cursing people out, flipping them off in the highway because somebody cut you off, and didn't he say something about letting people go in front of you when driving helps practice kind of love because you're saying you can go in front of me. Like my time isn't that much more important than you. I don't need to cut you off or not let you merge in. There's something to that it's a intention, which I think is spiritual will. You yourself have to want to work to raise your consciousness, to overcome some of these obstacles.
I was just, as you were talking, well, specifically the car thing that he mentions in that book kind of reminds me of, well, I briefly read part of this book about like Sufism, which is like Islamic mysticism. And in the book, he basically explains it like the concept of God is somewhat differently conceived. It's like the all, but it's also, the idea of God is theorized as like the beloved. It's like a lover, sort of.
Like a loving parent, sort of?
They like address it as like the beloved. It's more so what I was going for with that is like one of the tenets is, it's called remembrance or something like that. And the idea of it is in all moments you are meant to think of God and remember God. Like you're always supposed to be aware, right? Which is obviously extremely difficult to like hold that in your mind at all points of the day, which is why it's like an aspiration. But I think that kind of fits in well with the top of the map of consciousness, which is like love and enlightenment, etc.
So I think we need to back up maybe a second because
Yeah, we should probably follow the outline. It's almost like I created that for a reason and then I just strayed from it.
It's an interesting concept, and I think we're just kind of getting excited. So we're kind of running towards the enlightenment, becoming one with God section, and kind of, he spends a lot of time, right, on just going to get to courage, is what he calls it, 200. And I mean, from us personally making the podcast, that's kind of stepping into courage. Instead of fear versus not fear-based reality, he uses force versus power. That's kind of the framework. So anything below 200 consciousness, he says, you're kind of acting through external forces influencing you. You are being forced. That's your consciousness's view. You're viewing everything as a forced thing. Like in some cases, you are dealt a hand that you kind of, if you grow up and you don't have money and don't have food, that is an external factor that's impacting your physical body, but he's trying to separate your consciousness from that, which I think there could be some issues there, right? Like it's simple to write a book if you're living in the mountains, drinking coffee, looking out a beautiful vista every day, right? Versus some other situations. But the power aspect is you are internally motivated and you kind of have your own will power, your own willpower, the will to power. And you yourself can manifest without external kind of factor weighing on you. And I think that's courage, is you can speak your mind instead of second guessing yourself. And that's where the ego, and he talks about that a lot too, comes in.
So then would you say that at a base level, in order to seek enlightenment, you need to have your basic needs met?
See, I don't know, because think about the Buddha and stuff. Like, there are ascetic people that are seeking the answers as well.
What is the equivalent of an ascetic in this state?
And that's kind of tricky, right? What is an ascetic in the modern age? Do you give up electricity, running water, internet? Do you need those things? No.
But also you're missing the bigger point, which is if you're giving something up, then you already are coming from something because you're able to choose to give something up, right? So already, do you know what I'm saying? I like, to your example, like if you are trying to figure out how to survive every minute of every day, and that's how dire it is for your physical presence and your family to survive, I don't think you will ever be able to get to the point, at least not then, where you can recognize the ego and recognize that you're like separate than your physical self, sort of, you know what I mean? Like I feel like you wouldn't be able to get there because you would just be trying to survive every minute of every day.
Well, I mean, maybe that's partly why he says that the world is operating at a lower level of consciousness, because there are material constraints by and large, possibly. I'm not sure. I think we're getting into the weeds.
He doesn't really address that though in the book. That is sort of like an important thing. Okay, so then moving on. So how is a person's position on the map decided? We talked about how he has like some method for like locating it, but that's kind of irrelevant. Why is it that certain people react to things differently and are higher or lower on the map?
I don't know if he says that, does he? Why are people higher or lower?
He doesn't answer that?
I mean, he kind of discusses, the book at the end, he kind of lays out the map. And then at some point, it kind of becomes a self-help, not self-help, but a self-enlightenment. Like, this is what you should strive for, right? And he talks at length about Buddha, Jesus, Martin Luther, Muhammad. Like, he uses all of these historical figures to kind of say they are pointing the way. The saints, right, in religion are markers, if you will, of a higher consciousness. And essentially what you should do is look at those other conscious beings that are higher on the scale than you and kind of see what they are doing. How do they live their life? And if you can kind of emulate some of those or embody some of their characteristics or traits, that's how you yourself climb higher, right? Like if you think of, what would Jesus do as that like cliche saying, there's something to it, right? Like he gave his food, he gave whatever, he performed miracles, which, may or may not happen. But what we're really getting at is if I am trying to live like a pure soul or whatever, and that's an example of it, I'm not going to be mad if somebody cuts in front of me at the grocery store.
Well, this is probably getting off in the weeds, but it's said that people sort of react to your energy. And so if you approach the situation from a place of love, a good intentions, good vibes, etc., you're more likely to bring that out in others. And thus, more positive things will happen to you, is the idea, because you're speaking and feeling good things, and then you'll attract that sort of. Whereas I feel like it's an oversimplification given what we were just talking about, but I think it is true to some extent that if you are always thinking about things very negatively, everything is perceived more negatively, in part because you're just priming your brain to be thinking so negatively.
Right. But think of, even to your point, you do attract what you put out. Even in a day, I think your level of consciousness can change.
What is the role of ego in addressing your position on the map? And more broadly, what is the role of ego in terms of enlightenment? And you mentioned the Buddha earlier, I think, which was a rich prince and then renounced everything, and then including his wife and child. But he gave up all attachments, and attachments is big in Buddhism specifically, divesting from the ego essentially.
And this is now, okay, divestment, attachment, right? This guy is kind of just, I don't want to say stealing, but he's just kind of repackaging a lot of things into a book. But that's partly why this is a good primer for the pod and why we're trying to hit it now, because it kind of just references so many different things. And so from a Buddhist perspective, attachment, what does he say? How to help ascend personally? He says, let go of things, right? Letting go of attachment. But letting go, man, somebody cut me off the other day, I'm so mad. And you know how when sometimes people will retell a story, and just in the retelling of the story, they get so mad that it throws their entire vibe off, right? Everybody can be having a good time, but whatever happened in this story, wherever they were slighted or wronged, it evokes that fury again, right? It's kind of like they're tapping back into a negative consciousness. That's ego. I'm viewing myself versus you. I'm putting two bodies. And what he tries to talk about is there aren't two bodies. You're all one. It gets very esoteric and mystical at some points. Consciousness, love. He's like, you're all a person. Just love your neighbor, like Jesus. All these preachings and teachings he's kind of packaging, right? Letting go is a big thing for the ego specifically, and also for his consciousness map. Because to him, to let go of negativity and things that, even letting go of everything, because that is always influencing your current state. Your ego is attached to, oh, I'm going to try and sound smart. So you're thinking of what to say next instead of listening. And that you're not in the present by doing that. So to be present, to be here now, you have to let go to an extent to be in the moment, right? And it kind of applies to everything.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. It kind of reminds me of, back in the day, I tried to get into Eckhart Tolle, and I couldn't really get into that because it just wasn't really resonating with me. But now I kind of want to read it because I've got a lot more background stuff, which I think will help. But I think one of the things that he's talking about, and he obviously didn't invent this, but it's not identifying with the I. When you there's that voice in your head, which is you thinking, but it's that's not really me. That's kind of a weird and trippy concept. It isn't really you because you're a consciousness.
That's the I. Yeah, I am is a big thing, right? That's kind of, I think, therefore I am. It's kind of ego though, which we could talk about that forever and just keep spinning in circles, which it turns into an Ouroboros to an extent, right? You're just a snake eating your own tail if you're trying to dig into what is consciousness, what does it mean to have an ego, how do you lose it? And he kind of talks about that, right? At a certain point, enlightenment is beyond human comprehension, right? Because ultimately, if you are created from a very Catholic Christian perspective, if you are created in God's image, right, and it is a loving God or whatever, then you should embody the loving characteristics to be more like God.
Is it a loving God, though?
From an ego perspective, he's just you can only control what you yourself have control over. And that is your own consciousness. And therefore, you should embody love. That's the ultimate teaching, right? in a nutshell. Love your neighbor, the golden rule. But he's trying to say, if you're always loving, that's the best contribution you can make, basically. And that's the best state to be, is love. Pure love is warmth, happiness, joy.
Okay, you're just really skipping ahead in this outline.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Slap on the wrist. I'm kidding.
The patroness is keeping me in check.
So Hawkins talks about collective unconscious, which is a term that Jung created, which in the book Hawkins calls the database of, it's either the database of consciousness or the database of unconsciousness, which is the origin of intuition, premonition, dreams, and inspiration, psychic knowledge, and the source of the uncanny, which is big on TikTok. So how do you think that differs from the idea of the divine or the all, or does it?
That's a great question, because that's the tie-in to the magic. In this episode so far, consciousness, what are they talking, like that has nothing to do with magic, right? That's the connection, because, and this is where it gets kind of crazy, he essentially says, as you ascend the rungs of consciousness, you kind of develop powers, essentially. And he's kind of like, well, Jesus could do these things because, yeah, like when you're on that high of a consciousness level, you can do X, Y, and Z. You attain godlike powers and abilities, not as in a superpower way, but in a manifesting way to create and make happen.
I agree. I mean, that is the connection to magic. And you do get so-called powers, if you will. It's almost like ESP or something. But like as you go higher on the map of consciousness, you're going like lower from an ego perspective. So it's an interesting idea to think about, because while you have more access to magical abilities, the ego is so low that you're really just trying to commune at the end of the day and not using those powers for like ill will or because you're greedy or any other thing that's like associated with the ego. Where I feel like a lot of people, when they think of magic, they think of Crowley and like sacrificing animals and doing whatever they need to in order to get something for themselves, right? It's like I can do magic and my ego is going to get whatever it wants because I am God. Whereas like this is like, yeah, I mean, you can do that, but you no longer have as much interest in doing it, or not for the same reason.
And I think, so that's a very interesting tie-in, because yes, he's essentially saying if you become higher on the consciousness level, to be higher on the consciousness level, your inner intentions have to be more true, which is interesting because it's kind of self-regulating.
And you can't fake it.
Exactly. You will not be able to make people love you if you are a horrible, rude person. To be a revered figure like a saint or something, you have to be acting in a saintly way, right? But that's at all phases of your life. It's not, oh, I did one nice thing, everybody loves me now. And that's kind of why it's a practice. It's your spiritual will. You have to be dedicated at all times because you always have a choice. Do I flip the laundry, or do I keep sitting do I help that old lady cross the street, or do I just put my head down and look the other way? That lady fell. Do I help and see if she's okay, or do I just ignore it? You always have a choice, right? In all these small little instances throughout the day, which she kind of talks about. And that kind of goes back to letting go. You can't help people if you're not in the now paying attention. If you're in your thoughts still thinking about in 6th grade, you didn't ask Bobby out on the date, or whatever happened, right? That's in your mind, your ego that's attached to something that's pulling you out of the present. But going to those powers again, because I kind of rambled a bit there. In, I think, Hinduism, right? There's, I think, is it samadhi or siddhis? There's powers you can develop if you become spiritually enlightened there. Like, that's kind of a thought, right? And it's not like you're not shooting laser beams or anything.
Well, it's kind of like shamans have a special abilities that other people in the community can't do because they're so tapped in.
Right. Tapped in, that's good, yeah. Because if you're tapped in, you're higher on the scale, you're closer to God.
But you're also kind of channeling.
I don't know, actually. That's interesting. I don't think he talks about channeling, really.
But I mean, in my mind, he doesn't talk about channeling, but in my mind, it's kind of more like channeling than I don't know, you're like a vessel. But I guess like I'm still interested in this question of, so the database of consciousness. So it's like when my tattoo artist was talking about these monkeys like there were two sets of monkeys. One set of monkeys was on an island and another set was on the mainland. So these monkeys on an island, and some scientists were studying them. So the monkeys on the island discovered that they could cleanse their sweet potatoes if they dipped them in the ocean. And then lo and behold, the monkeys on the mainland start doing that as well. And she was using that as an explanation of like why there's such a thing as the collective consciousness. So I guess my question is collective consciousness the same as God? Because it's like everything, it's like Brahman, it's the all, and you can just tap into it. And that's kind of what I mean by channeling. Or like, because you just you know something, you have insight, even though you shouldn't, right? Or is that something different? Is that somehow, I feel like it's the same thing.
I think the collective unconscious, yeah, like people talk about that, and I think he talks about there's a field, the unified field theory, all this stuff, like everything's connected. So if you as a conscious being learn something, a different conscious human being is now aware of that, or it's somewhere nested in their brain in the field of the universe. That's now a thing that a conscious human being can tap into again, if we use that example. So go to algebra, right? Once Einstein invented that or discovered it, now you teach that in class. Like
He invented algebra.
somebody did at some point, right? I'm just saying, I think he did. I think to make some of the discoveries or theorems that he did, he had to discover or create other tools to help him. But it's like, okay, once he made that mental tool, we'll call it, it's available to everyone in the universe. And even think of, there's a first person to do something, and then other people realize that is now a possibility, right? So, oh, nobody's going to run a 4-minute mile. Well, guess what? Somebody does, and then before you know it, now we're running 3-minute miles or something crazy. It's kind of like once you are aware of it, or it's kind of put out there. So I guess in some way, especially with the internet, the collective unconscious, like if anything happens, you're kind of aware of it, and now that's a possibility for any human on Earth.
So then it is God, because if you use the example like from the Black Art by Richard Cavendish, when he talks about the idea behind like Western occultist magic is, I think what you said maybe in one of the prior episodes, what's true in your mind is true in the mind of God, and vice versa, because of as above, so below. And because I am made in God's image, therefore I am God to some extent. So that also fits in with this, because anything there is to know that another human knows, I also know because of God, basically.
But also, like, you can kind of become to some extent. So if you think of the map of consciousness, if you run into somebody and it's a great encounter, that might shape you in your thoughts going forward. If you encounter somebody low on the consciousness map who's cussing somebody out, that can shape you negatively, right? So you contribute to the collective consciousness map all the time in your interactions with others. You know, more broadly, I think, what I thought was very interesting, and I just want to hit this too, just speaking about society generally. In the beginning, we were kind of talking about the news and stuff, and he has a really, really interesting section where he's kind of talking about how to get higher on it. He kind of mentions how free speech as a concept is above 200. Because to be truly free in speech, you have courage to say anything without fear of judgment or shame. So it makes sense, right? You're not angry, you're free speech, you can say stuff. But then he says in practice in the US, it's below 200. He says it's like 180 or something, because he was like, is it really good in a civilization if any person can go on TV or on the internet and just talk about anything? Is that good for society? Is that good, right? Should we die for that? And he's like, being silent is anathema to the ego. That's a quote. Because to be egoless, you are silent. You don't interject. You don't insert yourself.
It also reminds me of, my favorite comedy special, Bo Burnham's Inside, where he has that song Welcome to the Internet, where he just riffs on how anything is available, including like the most messed up things at any point and at any time.
David Hawkins in this book says it's not good, free speech, basically. I think he pretty much explicitly says that because he's like, or democracy's not good. He has some crazy takes.
It's just like anything. It's like political systems. Oh, that's good in theory, but it's never been done well ever in practice. You can't really ignore the fact that theory and practice go hand in hand, right? Which is why praxis is a thing.
I mean, this is a great section because he says we have an inversion of spiritual values in our society in which freedom of speech has become worshipped as the ideal pinnacle of humankind, but in fact, it is disguised egotism. So he's basically saying freedom of speech basically is just encouraging rampant egos everywhere. To become like God is to lose your ego, right? You're striving and aspiring to be not yourself, which is inherently egoless.
I don't know. I mean, I get what you're saying, but at the same time, like we could never do this podcast if free speech wasn't a thing, because in the eyes of society, all these things that we've just been talking about, not only is this like antithetical to the Christian tenets, but nobody like wants you to talk about these things. Even just the magical sun, it's like,
oh, burn them at the stake.
Like, I'm just saying.
I'm not putting that into the reality.
You're missing my point though.
I mean, it's hypocritical to make a podcast after saying ego's bad and you shouldn't speak, which ties into a question in that outline. Does he have an ego?
Oh, yeah.
Like, yeah, it's free speech. We wouldn't be able to have this podcast, but it's also an ego thing. But it's like, well, you also wrote a book, David Hawkins, so that's also ego, isn't it? And your introduction, you're saying how you're an enlightened, awakened being and stuff.
He had his wife write that, I think.
Okay, but you know what I'm saying? Like, he's basically trying to elevate himself in the intro before you even read it to be like, this is why you should listen to this guy. He is enlightened.
Take his word for it.
Exactly. Like, this is truth, capital T.
Well, and again, he says that you never move more than a few like numbers up and down. So you might move from like 200 to 205. He didn't really act like you could go much further than that, except for he claims to have gone, well, he never states where he started, but I'm sure he just started out like the rest of us. And then he became enlightened, which contradicts what he said. I think one thing that we should discuss a little bit more is, well, we just kind of jumped into it, like love as a dominating worldview is way higher on the map of consciousness and closer to, if not already within, enlightenment. But what is love? Like, what does it mean to be operating from a place of love? And he describes that a little bit as love is kind of a way of being, not an emotion, because he's like, don't think about it in terms of romantic love. And it's not sentimentality. So there's like different ways of thinking about love, and it's not that. So what is it?
I mean, it's interesting because even in like my Qigong, there's a concept of like love is a state of being. Loving awareness is something you can embody, right? To be a present conscious being that is aware in the moment, but is also just loving. And to me, this is crazy. Think of like a Snow White, right? Like in the cartoon. She's just like dancing, frolicking, singing to the birds and the animals and the nature. That's just loving, right? She's not sexually loving anything. She doesn't have a partner. She's just living happily with nature and just loving and good vibes, basically, right? She's kind to the animals. She's dancing around and singing and carefree in the moment. And I think that's kind of the state of being, right? You're just taking things as they come, but you're taking them as they come with a positive outlook. Like when people approach you from a state of loving, you're like, oh, what's going on with this guy? Like, how's it going? What's up? What are you doing today? How's your day? Versus from a state of fear walking down that street and somebody's walking towards you. Who is this person? What do they want from me? Is that guy trying to talk to me? Does he want money? There's kind of a different, it's the same situation, but the reaction is completely different.
Yes, I mean, I think dogs are really good at embodying loving awareness because they don't have so much, like they don't really have an ego, or it's way more minor, so it doesn't get in the way and inhibit them.
That's a great example. And like our dog, which might cameo in this if her barking gets in here in the edit, but she is loving awareness partially because she does not have an ego in the sense that she can let go instantly. She wipes out in the backyard. Oops, she scratched her toe. 2 seconds later, she's smiling, running around, happy as a lark, right? She just lets it go instantly. It happened, she's fine, moving on. A human, you stub your toe, you're cursing, shouting, and by you, this is me, because I did this the other week, and it's still healing. But, you know, it's still with me. I'm still thinking about it or whatever. That's the ego. I'm not letting go the way she does. As an animal, she's happy all the time.
To be fair, he doesn't characterize it. It sounds like a hierarchy, but he doesn't describe it as such. Right. And he discourages that heavily because that's obviously not coming from a place of love. But I also think it's helpful to think about somewhere in here, he talks about like every person is doing the best that they possibly can. And if that's how you operate, that also helps you with loving awareness. It's like people aren't out to get you or like nobody, you know, that kind of thought process. It's like, yeah, did they mess up? Yeah, maybe, but that's part of being a person.
Exactly. People are people, right? Nobody's perfect. You're not God. You're not infallible. Nobody else is either. So people are going to mess up. You move on. You can claim it's a conspiracy and people hate you and they maneuvered and did all this, but it's like maybe they just messed up or whatever. Just move on. That's not worth holding on to, really.
Yeah, so speaking of holding on to things, because as you know, I'm not very good at letting things go personally. I struggle with that a lot. So one of the things that he talks about, and we've talked about it a lot, but he specifically says you should sort of face the lower levels on the map of consciousness, which I think just means being in the present and feeling whatever emotions might be coming up, but then letting them go and not holding on to them, not holding grudges, that kind of thing. Because my second question is going to be like, what does that process, letting go, mean to you? But I think I just explained it to myself. But I guess like, how do you do that in practice? Like, how do you feel something and then let it go and then not obsess over it, you know?
Here's how, and this is the weekly wisdom. I think this is the answer. The way to let go and overcome is to live your life like a prayer, which is what he says at some point. And the weekly wisdom, the quote specifically is, by intention, your entire life becomes devotional. You yourself become the prayer. The only person you have to answer to is yourself. That's like from a letting go perspective and intentionality. If you are aware of your emotions, you can recognize if you are acting mad or angry or wait, I'm getting worked up about what? If you are aware, you can shift your intention. If you have spiritual will, you can let go. You can say, oh, I'm really pissed because my boss didn't give me that raise that I really wanted. Okay, I can let go of that now. Like I'm acknowledging that's why I'm upset. I'm really mad and my heart's beating and my face is red because they messed up my order. Okay, I can let go of it now by being aware. And then with your intention, you can say, I don't want to hold on. Like, I thought that was a cool quote because, you know, every element, going back to our earlier, you can practice this at all times, right? It's your inner mind, your consciousness. Everything you do, you are the controller of ultimately. And it's kind of reclaiming that and recognizing you can kind of choose to be angry or upset, happy or sad. To some extent, you can always choose how you react to something.
Well, that's like the famous Buddhist quote or saying where it's like, I don't know how, I have to find the way of what it actually says. Pain is unavoidable, but suffering is avoidable because of that process of letting go if you're able to do it. But I will say that at least for me, well, because I'm not very good at letting go, I kind of conceive it as a process. Not only does it take a lot of practice, but just think about like all the things that you kind of like hold on to in your life that you know you like should let go, but you just like can't for some reason. But I feel like when those things come up, if you can like feel it and then dismiss it every moment that it comes up, then eventually it won't anymore, right? At least that seems like that might be true.
I know what the quote was that you were trying to say. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Things will come up in life that'll hurt, right? But you don't have to fixate on it and suffer. You can be like, that sucks. But suffering is when you just live in it. And
That's why they say wallow in suffering.
yeah, or self-pity. But that's where he gets from the consciousness. You can kind of see, right, how there are people that you meet that are kind of negative Nancys or Debbie Downers or negative Nicholases, to not be just gendered. But like, there are people that just have a negative vibe, kind of. They just have a negative outlook on all things. And he's saying from a consciousness level, they're not operating as highly.
Well, it's unpleasant to be around. If somebody's always like that, like it's one thing if you're in a bad mood, but again, even that, like, I mean, you've been around people who their bad mood literally changes the environment of a room to such an extent where people cannot stand to be around them, or it just warps your own mood, which is interesting. It's almost like it's contagious in some way.
Yeah.
But also when he was saying that thing about the prayer, I liked that. But the last part where he was talking about how you only answer to yourself, does that not seem like ego-driven to you? Because you shouldn't really be answering to anyone because yourself doesn't really exist. Isn't that the whole idea of it?
Well, I think his idea of it, and there was like an ellipses. I kind of jumped down to that. I kind of, in the reading, I selected more. But I mean, he's saying the only person you have to answer to is yourself, is his like kind of a crappy way of being the Taoist. He who competes with no one cannot be competed with. There is no scorecard. The only person that you're beating up because you are mad about how you handled something, or you're embarrassed about how you did this thing, or you flopped a presentation, the only person that you're beating up on is yourself. Right? Nobody else is thinking about that presentation in middle school where you crapped your pants and everybody laughed at you.
I would be thinking about that if that happened.
But that's you.
No, I'm saying if I saw somebody shit themselves in middle school, I would never forget that.
That's funny.
But I know what you mean.
If you are thinking about somebody shitting their pants, that's you. That person doesn't need to let that bother. Like, who cares? Whatever.
Yeah, they can move past it even if I can't.
Exactly. And that's the whole point. It's your conscious decision. Is you can always control your like, somebody could be embarrassed for you, but it's like, okay, I'm not embarrassed. Oh, I'm cringing at how they did that.
Yes, because people say, like on TikTok, if you live your most cringeworthy life, you're living according to your most authentic self, if you think about it. Because if I don't do something in public because I'm afraid that it'll be cringy to somebody else. Like if I randomly just decided to do like a flash dance and perform something from Hamilton in the middle of Walmart, that would be super cringe, right? But I could do it, and that would be probably liberating for me if I could actually do that.
And he has an example in there. There's this guy that loved to dance, I mean, it's probably a made up story, but in it,
Dr. Hawkins would never.
He claims that this client or patient or whatever always wanted to dance, but they were too ashamed, right? And then at some point they crossed the threshold and they just said, screw it, I'm gonna go dance. They end up having a great time, and they are so overjoyed and elated while finally getting to dance and loosening up and letting go and being on the dance floor, that their energy then inspires, and everybody else is having a good time now because they're lighting up. They're doing it and they're enjoying it. So your perception of yourself shapes how others view it. If you do something nervously, other people are like, man, I feel bad for them. But if you just stand up there and give a speech, people are like, wow, that guy gave a great speech. Or, I didn't love the content, but, they power to them. They believed in themselves, right? And that's kind of what you can always control your own belief in yourself.
Well, speaking of belief in self, it seems that Dr. Hawkins has a lot of belief in self because, I mean, in probably the best ad for the book, he's like, buy this book because, no, he didn't say that, but he did say something to the effect of, if you've already bought this book, then you're kind of already on the path of enlightenment, which was interesting. And I was like, I kind of scoffed at it. And then later he was talking about the Buddha and how the Buddha says something like, you only need 3 things to achieve enlightenment. 1, exist. 2, have heard of enlightenment. And 3, seek it. Which is, it obviously sounds very simplistic, but it also makes a lot of sense because, I mean, even though I would not say I'm very advanced in terms of enlightenment, there are a lot of people who have not heard of some of these things. I guess I'm further on the path than I give myself credit for.
And it is just a path, right? And it's a process. And that's kind of part of it too. It's a practice, it's a process, it's ongoing. Jesus doesn't become Jesus, or the Buddha doesn't become Buddha because they did one good thing, right? They lived their life like a prayer. That's why they're remembered, because they always exhibited some of these qualities. To a regular person, it's like, wow, the willpower to just always be happy and smiling and loving or doing whatever is not easy, but it is a path that you can work towards if you're aware of it and seeking it.
Well, and then I also wrote down just in terms of how to move up through the different levels of consciousness. And this is similar to being in the present and not being ego-driven. He kind of talks about how you should feel each stage or level of consciousness, not grow attached to it, but also not seek any gains, which basically means you need to divest from the ego to a certain extent. Then you can move up. But you also can't resist it. You have to actually feel it if you want to be able to move up.
From an ego perspective too, and just kind of a way of thinking, I think at some point there's in here, you shift your perception or your perspective of the world changes from I am my body to I have a body at some point as you become higher up. So I am the body is kind of a different thing than I have a body.
No, I mean, I like that phrase. He doesn't really talk about death in there.
No, he doesn't. I think that's kind of what we're talking, the I am versus I have, because from a conscious perspective, your consciousness will live after the body is gone. The consciousness, from a vessel perspective, which you said earlier, consciousness lives in the body, which maybe that's where possession comes from. I don't know.
But do you ever just have an existential crisis because you're not really sure what you are? If I'm an ego, everything I know or everything I thought I knew about myself is only stuff I know about the ego mostly. My consciousness doesn't really have a personality or anything, right? It's just pure energy. So I can't really identify with that.
I guess that's kind of going to the collective unconscious though. The consciousness is wrapped in a different meat suit, I guess, a different body, but you're still advancing the human. If you view it as a human consciousness throughout time, not even today, just the evolution of humans to get to this point is some language evolved, all this other stuff happened to get us to here. And now how are you contributing to continue it going forward, I guess? The species in a weird way.
So you think the database of consciousness is only human consciousness?
The monkeys is a different type of consciousness than human consciousness.
Why? So you're saying then, so you do think there's a difference between God and the database of consciousness. Otherwise, you wouldn't make that distinction.
I don't know. I think I'm getting lost in the weeds.
Yeah, nobody cares to hear us debate about that.
So you'll like this, okay? He ranks certain sacred texts and religious scriptures on the map. So according to him, he has the Gospel of St. Luke as 699. This is what annoys me. Teachings of Lao Tzu, 610. I love Taoism. He ranks the Bible higher.
Why do you care what Dr. Hawkins thinks?
That's what I'm saying. I don't, and it is arbitrary.
Well, it makes you wonder, how unbiased is his rating scale really?
It's very Western. Like, he loves capitalism in this. He loves the Bible. It is interesting. Yeah, like, now that you say that.
He also talks in there about how there's a connection between like quantum physics and philosophy. Like people like Heidegger. He talks about Heidegger a lot in there.
Yeah, we'll have to get into that in a future episode, truthfully, because, yeah, that requires a lot more than we're able to in the context of this.
Let's talk about quantum physics!
That's going to be insane because I know nothing about physics. Okay, thanks for listening, everyone. Picture Ness signing us out. See you next week. Go read some book.
Read a Bab.